Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Total War Warhammer 2. So yeah, the patch came out, we got the Queen and the Crone DLC coming out. Now, obviously I only care about High Elves, so let's go over some of the new stuff that they've got. Maybe I'll go over some of the new stuff that other factions have, but realistically speaking, this is what I care about. So first of all, we've got Elithanar. Now, if you're not interested in getting the Queen and the Crone DLC, then you can still get Elithanar. He is free. I do find that he's an interesting but ultimately sort of glitchy kind of lord right now. I find that his arrow tends to travel over the head of the first model in a unit that he's attacking. And if that means if you're firing at a general or something like that, almost all of the shots seem to go over the head of the enemy general. Could just be me being unlucky. I have noticed that I tend to miss with projectiles that other people say are guaranteed to hit. Like I've never seen anyone miss fireballs the same way that I do. But in any event, it could be that he's bugged out right now. It could just be my bad luck. But either way, he's fantastic at sniping out really expensive high-tier knight-type units. His damage is really high per shot, 320 damage per shot, almost all of it's armor-piercing. So you can use him with his 300 range to sort of pick away at enemy units very, very effectively. Now, his attack speed is quite low at 9.9 reload speed, and this is sort of sped up by one of his abilities, but even with that, I find that he fires fairly slowly. Now, he is a very unique lord. His own kill count is usually quite low, but he has these really powerful supportive abilities, which is quite odd, all things considered. I figured he'd be kind of a very assassin-y type of lord that's able to sort of pick away at the enemy general and ultimately take him down, and that's kind of actually what I would like to have seen from him. His melee statistics are not fantastic, they're not terrible either, but his armor and his hit points are low enough that he's going to get wrecked pretty quickly. His melee defense isn't that high. His melee attack is very, very high though, but he is quite fast at 46 speed, and he's able to sort of get around the battlefield quite effectively and has lots of little tricks up his sleeve. One of the things he's got for his early abilities, no mounts, you'll notice here. One of his abilities is he's got Darkened Skies, and this is the most powerful plus reload skill that the Halves have access to. It's a plus 20 reload skill and a fairly large radius, and this is why his reload speed is actually a little bit faster. But 20 reload speed is kind of insane, and there are other things that the Halves can take now that do stack with this. So this is a really, really powerful ability if you want to sort of create a gun line or just have some skirmishers or fire arrows in whichever way, or even just augment your artillery if you really wanted to. All in all, a really great ability if you want to be going in for a ranged build. Costs 144, which is not that bad. Next up is Slippery. I tend to find that I don't take this on him. It's just not necessary. I don't find that you want to have the melee defense, and if he's relying on the speed from Slippery, you've probably mispositioned him. But it could still be a useful thing. I just often save the points. It's 73 points, which is not that many, but it is enough that I often give it a skip. Next up is Mislead. This is the really interesting ability. Costs 149 here. It's activatable up to 3 times and has a 90-second cooldown. It lasts for quite a while though. What it does is it creates a clone of Elithanar, and the real Elithanar gets the abilities Stalk, Snipe, and Unspottable. This means that he's going to be able to sort of pick away at the enemy with arrows, and there's no retaliation. Even if the enemy knows that you've dropped a clone in front of them and that clone is like not the real Elithanar, it doesn't matter. They can't fire at the real one. There are certain conditions in which you can spot him still, but if you're using him relatively correctly, you should be able to sort of slip out of those sort of situations just fine. So this ability, again, fairly situational. If you're going to be using him from the back and use him as a protected sort of buff lord, then you don't really need this ability all that much, although it could still be useful for disrupting charges or getting in the way of the enemy or causing their AI to be a little bit buggy. Next up, items. This is, again, these are very, very expensive items, 223, 221, and 221, and they're all fairly situational. The Moonbow only has 2 shots, so you're paying like 110 gold per shot, but the damage that it deals is very, very good, and it's capable of cleaving its way through like 5 Chaos Knights and killing all of them. So the amount of damage that you're going to be able to get out of those 2 shots can be very good. I think that you're going to have to be up against someone that you know for sure is going to have a unit worth firing at, which is going to be cavalry, generally speaking, or maybe even chosen warriors or something like that, or maybe Ironbreakers. You got to get a good angle on that, and then you've got to sort of have the shot sort of come in and actually hit, which might not happen all the time. But if it does, it deals huge damage. Next up is the Stone Midnight, plus 22% missile resistance in a 55-meter radius. This is the reason why I don't think I've seen anyone taking any missile units against High Elves. The High Elves can now stack such humongous physical missile resistance and all-around resistances in their armies, as well as having Silver Shield block chance on their basic infantry. Like, they're virtually immune to conventional missiles at this point in time. And there's realistically no faction that could take crossbows or handguns or bows and think that that's a safe thing to take against the High Elves, because there's often going to be no hope in hell that you can out-skirmish them. The exception, of course, is dwarves, who are going to out-skirmish them on account of their own skirmishers being immune to missiles, but there's no point in them taking missiles against you either, because they just wait until you run out of arrows and then charge in anyway. So this is a fantastic ability, but I haven't actually been able to use it because nobody takes missiles against High Elves. It's kind of great, actually. The Shadow Crown, this is a really fantastic ability. It's constant and affects abilities within 55 meters, or units within 55 meters, which is a really big radius. It doesn't activate until the enemy is within 70 meters of you, though, but once they are, you gain 18% speed and plus 5 melee defense, and this is a really, really great ability. If you're leading a group of Shadow Warriors or whatever it is that you want to do, you can run away from the enemy really effectively using the plus 18% speed, getting away from combat very, very effectively thanks to this ability. I've used this to get away from fast cavalry and stuff like that in conjunction with some other abilities, although with fast cavalry you can generally just turn around and beat the crap out of them with a Lithanar and a couple of Shadow Warriors. Like, if they've got Warhounds of Chaos or something like that, you get a couple volleys off on them while you're running away, and once it looks like they're about to get close range, you just charge them anyhow, and then you'll probably just wreck them anyway. But all in all, this is a fantastic ability if you're going to be running a skirmisher line of Shadow Warriors with a Lithanar and have them sort of pick away at the enemy and retreat back towards your main line. You'll be able to get a ton of utility out of this one if you're doing that style. Now, if again you're playing a protected style where you're using them to buffer your units with the missile resistance and the reload rate, then you don't really need this one. Still, fantastic Lord all around, but very situational. I find that because, again, his shots tend to miss a lot and he doesn't have a very good rate of fire, he's sort of situational, depends on what you're going to be up against. I think that he's probably going to be good against things like Chaos, though. Anyway, let's try Ilaria the Radiant next. So she does have some mount options: the basic Elven Steed, the Barded Illimer Steed, and the Great Eagle. These are all actually pretty good options there. The Great Eagle seems risky, but you have to remember that most people aren't going to take air against High Elves, so it can be actually quite safe. You just have to worry about the missiles at that point in time. For abilities, she's got the Life Bloom and the Shield of Safri abilities there. You've got Bunavisha, which is an interesting ability. It changes all of your attacks to magic in a 40-meter radius, which is a pretty large area. This is kind of good, kind of bad. Now, if you've got an army that's going to be fine without her, then this is a great ability to have. But in that case, what you can do is, if you're up against enemies that have magic resistance, you can just move her away from those units. They'll lose the buff. But if you need the buff because you need her other abilities, then this becomes a little bit more dicey, because there are some units out there that are magic resistance. For example, you would never take this if you're up against dwarves. It would just be a terrible, terrible idea. It would make all the dwarven units more resistant to all your attacks. Don't do that. The other effect of this is immune to psychology for all the units within 40 meters, which is actually pretty good. You don't necessarily need it with High Elves because they are innately pretty good as far as leadership goes. So you might not need that. Next up, you got Arcane Conduit, improved power recharge rate, increased power reserves. It's not really that special, but it is there. For spells, pretty interesting options there. You got Faw's Protection, a pretty decent buff all in all. You've got Banishment, not my favorite Vortex. You've got the Earthblood spell, pretty good buff. Healing spell. You got Shield of Thorns, again, pretty good buff spell, not great. You've got the Tempest. By the way, this thing, if you stack it on top of all the other stuff, you can end up with some pretty obscene missile resistance and just wait till the enemy runs out of arrows, but the duration on this isn't really long enough for you to do it in that particular way there. Tempest, I really like Tempest, but it is nerfed to hell. There are certainly instances where I've used it and had it have a big impact on the battle, but yeah, we'll see how that sort of works out for us here. Next up, Arcane Forging, not my favorite spell. It's just too expensive to assassinate lords with it. And the plus 30 to ability recharge in seconds is not a long enough effect for that to really kick in a way that I think matters. So not my favorite spell there. It's often the one that I get rid of. For items, she's got a very, very powerful one here, the Shield Stone of Isha, plus 12% physical resistance in a 40-meter radius around her. This can be added to a bunch of other things that Hiles have to make them very, very resilient to just generally most things. Next up, you got the Stave of Avalorn, greatly improved power recharge rate and minus 100% miscast chance. These are kind of at odds with one another, and it only activates once. I don't particularly like this item. Next up, you got the Star of Avalorn. It's a pretty powerful regen ability, and can be used to sort of heal a blob plus Alariel or whatever. It's got 2 uses. Anytime you've got sort of like healing, it can be pretty effective, and this is a pretty powerful version of it. So if you do need to get your units back up to health, this can be a really good option. Now, the fact that she has got so much healing, like she's got Life Bloom and she's got the Earthblood spell, like does mean that you don't need it as badly, but since Earthblood actually only heals a tiny amount, really, it can be quite useful. Like both those abilities only heal a tiny amount. The Star of Avalorn is much, much beefier in terms of how much health it heals. So you would use this when you really need to heal quite a lot of hit points. And other than that, no more lords, it's just those two. For heroes, you've got the Handmaiden and the Everqueen as a new hero type. These guys are really, really powerful. Not the best armor or melee statistics or melee damage or anything like that. Pretty standard for a lot of things. The big thing is like they're really not that armored. Like that's the main thing. Their other statistics pretty okay. The nobles I'd still say better because of the anti-armor trait, which I think is really, really good. But these guys have got a decent anti-large bonus of plus 35. Makes them pretty good against large targets, but not armored ones. And a lot of the large monsters out there do beat the crap out of these guys just because they're not too durable. Their hit points pool, again, pretty low, but you can bolster that with the Elven Steed or the Barded Illimer Steed. Especially like plus 30 armor is quite nice. Their charge bonus, pretty decent, but nothing too special. Their ammunition, flaming, and magical, which can be good, could be bad. Their armor damage for their missile attack, though, is armor piercing and very, very good. Now, these guys, just based on their stats, are kind of a versatile, interesting hero that could be used, but what really makes them special is their abilities. So first of all, you got the Quicksilver Shot. This is a 40-meter radius plus 10 reload skill ability that stacks with the other ones. So you can end up with like absolute machine guns of archers, thanks to the high elven abilities there. Foe Seeker, this is really not that important for these guys, generally speaking, unless you really want them out and about on the battlefield, helping out different things and attacking the enemy. For items, these are also really interesting and also very supportive. You've got the Horn of Isha, plus 5 to reload skill and plus 5 melee attack. Those are both really fantastic statistics to have more of. So this can actually bolster a big chunk of your army. Like if you've got a bunch of Lothran Sea Guard or Shadow Warriors or whatever that use both reload skill and melee attack, you're going to get a lot of mileage out of that one. Then you've got the Enchanted Spyglass, plus 10% missile damage, and like plus missile damage is one of those few things in this game. Like it's so rare to get that plus 10 missile damage from anything that I think that this is one of their best abilities. It means that every arrow you fire is just that much more efficient, because normally like reload speed's great. It means that you can dump all your arrows really, really quickly and hopefully kill all the enemies before anything too interesting happens. But this means that you're able to kill more units with that number of arrows, which is just not really that common in this game. So fantastic hero all around. I do really like these guys, and they almost always have a place that you can fit them in your army. They can just do so many different things for you. If you are looking for just an anti-monster guy with a halberd or something like that, though, the noble is a little bit more efficient, especially in terms of cost. And also you can, I should just point out, do some really funny stuff in the sense that you could take one of these guys with the plus 12% missile resistance Sacred Incense. You could give him the Armor of the Stars, and you could take a Lithanar and have 34% missile resistance on 2 guys with with Vanguard deployment, and just have these 2 jerkasses running around, giving immunity to missile weapons for your Shadow Warriors who are just running around in circles like a bunch of dicks. Could be very fun if you happen to feel like that is a good strategy. Personally, I'm not sure that that's enough to make them not fragile, but I think that is pretty funny that you can do that. Next up, Mage of Shadows was added, Mage of Heavens. You kind of know what I think about these lores. I quite like the Mage of Shadows. Their ability here, the Smoke and Mirrors, 24-second duration is really good. Adding another 12% to your speed. You can do some pretty interesting skirmishing things with this. If you're using a Lothanar, you can end up with plus 30% to your speed, and you can also sort of conjunction that. If you're being chased by cavalry or something like that, you just pop Melkoth's Mystifying Miasma on those cavalry, and you've got 14 seconds of them basically being slowed down to nothing while your units are able to run much, much faster. Or you can overcast, I believe that was increased duration. Oh no, cast range, okay. But you can sort of do that and just end up having your units run away very, very effectively while still peppering that unit with arrows. And then you can put a Pit of Shades in front of them or whatever, because it sort of tosses units and keeps them in there. I think Occam's Mind Razor is actually a really great spell for High Elves, because you can put this on a unit of Sword Masters and imagine, like, you don't have to overcast when you're playing High Elves when you're using Occam's Mind Razor. You can just cast this on a single unit that's really key or really crucial to whatever it is you're doing, and have them sort of chop right through the enemy there. Withering, I think, is still an okay debuff. I think that Enfeebling Foe, I don't remember actually. I don't think this one was... Yeah, this one's not that great just because it doesn't have the ability to AoE it. I'm pretty sure this one did, though. Yeah, this one did. So, Penumbral Pendulum, I've been seeing more people using this. They did seem to buff it. It does seem to actually do quite a lot of damage. But, yeah, like, Shadow Mages, I do think that they're really good. Nice addition to High Elves. Mage of Heavens, I think that their passive is really weak. Railing Skies, minus 24% speed and minus 22% melee defense. I don't necessarily feel as though this is really the best of passives, just because people aren't going to take flying against High Elves regardless. And even if you did, like, the Railing Skies debuff never really seems to matter that much. For spells, though, you've got Harmonic Convergence. Not my favorite. You can sort of get that extra armor. The reason that it's okay for High Elves is that, again, you cast on one really big key unit and make it into a super unit. But there's sort of caps on how much effect you can get from melee attack, melee defense, so it's not necessarily the greatest. Wind Blast, I don't find it to be a very good spell. Curse of the Midnight Wind, one of my favorite debuffs, actually. It's what really sort of redeems, I think, Lore of Heavens for me. Extended effect duration as well. 50 seconds of minus 30 armor is really powerful. Minus 26 melee attack. You can use this on an area. It's just, generally speaking, a really shitty thing to get hit by. Iridon's Thunderbolt, of course. I find the strike area to be too small. Common Cassandra is really good against things that bunch up. I don't find Chain Lightning to be reliable enough to use it consistently, so I don't tend to use it. But, you know, good additions overall to the High Elves if you want to sort of go for gimmicky things. But personally speaking, I think that High Magic and Light Magic are still going to be the ones that are sort of kings for High Elves. Of course, you could also just take Alariel the Radiant or Teclis, which are also both very powerful with some interesting spell choices. So first of the regiments of renown are the Scions of Mathlin, which is interesting that they're spearmen, but whatever. I'm going to go ahead and compare them to the fully gold chevroned spearmen here, and we're going to do that for all these units here. So you can see that the Scions of Mathlin are 110 points higher and have no superior stats, but despite this, they're still one of my favorite regiments of renown for the High Elves, and that's all coming down to this one ability here, Aura Protection. As long as you've got over 50% mana, so 15 or over, you get 12% damage resistance on your units within 40 meters of this unit. And that is a lot of damage resistance. It's not physical resistance, it's not magic resistance, it's damage resistance. Which means that everything that is within that area is reducing damage by a pretty substantial amount. This ability just, I think, is ridiculously good and is what makes this unit by itself kind of worth it. Their statistics overall, again, not really that great, actually. Their melee defense is quite high, and they've got charge defense against all, but realistically, you're only taking these guys as an 850 point, 12% damage resistance sort of mobile buff. That could also sort of watch your backline. I actually think these guys are a great unit to keep in your backline to defend your archers with, because it'll sort of allow you to use the aura to the best of your abilities, while also sort of keeping your unit free in the backline to sort of keep your backline safe. Next up, you've got the Pyrmane Company. So again, let's take a look here. Now, I don't find that Armor Breaker is a great, or Sundered Armor is a great ability to have on an armor-piercing unit. But that is sort of what these guys have. Same statistics as the standard White Lions. But with the addition of the fact that they're a little bit cheaper, the fact that their statistics are pretty okay, and the fact that they've got the Guardian ability, 18% physical resistance to lords or heroes within 30 meters of them. They've got some interesting additional options. One of the things you could potentially do with these guys is just have some heroes in there mixed in, like for example, say the Handmaiden of the Everqueen, or Aluthanar, or even Tyrion, and have these guys sunder the armor of the enemy tough units. Minus 30 armor is actually fairly substantial. And while they've got sundered armor, that hero like Tyrion or the Handmaiden or whatever the hell you're using is going to be able to chop through those units much more efficiently, because they're now able to get through that 30 points of armor for free. Their own abilities and damage, I don't think that they're worth it based on their stats alone, so you would really have to be relying on having an additional non-armor piercing unit working in conjunction with these guys, as well as potentially some heroes sticking it in with them to get that 18% physical resistance, because 18% is really quite good. After that, you've got the Phoenix Guard here, Keepers of the Flame. You can go ahead and upgrade these guys all the way. So one of the nice things is that you're basically getting 3 gold chevron Phoenix Guard for about 225 points cheaper. Their statistics, as you can see, are exactly the same there. They have got magical attacks. They've got the Mark of Azurian, which is a really weird ability. Whenever one of them gets killed, they explode, which deals damage in a radius around them. It is a fairly small radius, but it can be actually kind of useful. I have found these guys can beat other fairly high-tier infantry, and of course they're going to be really good against large monsters. These guys also do have sort of the typical things that you expect to have on Phoenix Guard, but broadly speaking, you're taking them for the magical attack and for the Mark of Azurian. Other than that, they're really going to function basically exactly the same. They have no real main differences, but again, 225 points discount, which is really quite substantial. Hiles got the biggest change in their missile infantry. First of all, we've got the Shadow Warrior, and this has actually been one of my favorite additions to the High Elves. They've got stock Vanguard deployment, and they only cost 850. Now, let's take a look actually at a comparison here, not the Way Watcher. So we can compare these guys to the Deepwood Scouts here. Deepwood Scouts here, very comparable in a lot of respects there. The Shadow Warriors cost 150 points more. They've got a little bit less ammunition, but look at those differences in melee statistics. 18 extra melee attack, 6 extra weapon strength, plus 3 charge bonus, way more hit points, better armor by a little bit. Like, these guys are actually really good in melee combat. I've been finding in a lot of situations, once I've run out of arrows with the Shadow Warriors, there's nothing wrong with sending them into melee combat. They will be able to beat a lot of things that you wouldn't expect them to. I find that as well, because you're able to sort of Vanguard deploy them and just have them retreat back to your lines under certain circumstances, you can get lots and lots of arrow kills with these guys and then just rush into melee with them after they've run out of arrows, and they're going to perform well in both particular cases. I think that this is actually one of the best additions for the High Elves, and I'd like actually taking them more than I like taking the Archers, because I don't really have to defend these guys. It lets me be more aggressive with my army in the early stages, and also because these guys are, generally speaking, going to be able to go through all their arrows. I don't find I'm able to use all my arrows with my Archers consistently. These guys almost always do it. Next up, we got the Storm Riders, another Regiments of Renown. This, I don't really find I have much purpose for these guys. They only cost a little bit more than the Lothran Seaguard fully upgraded. Their missile damage is actually pretty much the same. You can sort of ignore that number there. But the thing about these guys is that they've got a whole bunch of disparate abilities that I don't think are that useful. They've got Vanguard deployment and the ability to fire while moving. I don't actually think that these are useful traits to have on this type of unit. So I don't necessarily actually really like these guys. Pretty much, like, I would never take this many chevrons on an unshielded unit of Lothran Seaguard, so not really my favorite sort of unit there. Next up, you got the Sisters of Avalorn. These are what really completes the High Elven skirmish line. If you're going for just a regular sort of skirmish line and just want the damage, these guys are going to be able to do it. Really quite good missile fire and 1,100 points there. You can sort of compare these guys to Way Watchers because they're the ones that sort of have the armor-piercing damage. But you could also compare them to the Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts. So you could think of them as being like either. They're obviously more price comparable to the Way Watchers, but the way they operate is quite different. The nice thing about Sisters of Avalon, very, very high damage there. I think that the Way Watchers is a little bit higher there. But very good missile damage there, good range, a good amount of ammunition, so on and so forth. The nice thing is they've also got this pretty good melee attack, melee defense, melee weapon damage, decent armor. Like, they're an all-around sturdy, solid unit that's able to deal out a lot of damage to enemy armored units. I find that I've been using just one or two units of these guys because their damage is so good, and you're able to pump that damage even higher thanks to the reload reduction speeds that the Hives have access to. You can get these guys out to the point where their one unit is enough. You don't need to have a big lineup of these things, whereas with Thunderers or something like that, their damage is pretty good, but it comes out fairly slowly. So you're going to, generally speaking, need more units of those sorts of units to get the job done. Anyway, next regiment is Renown, the Grey. These guys are elite Shadow Warriors. They're kind of interesting in that they're not a linear upgrade to these guys, and they cost substantially more. So what you're paying for when you get these guys, you're paying for a little bit of melee defense. Ultimately, again, the range attack is basically the same. They've got the ability to snipe, so these guys are able to sort of get up in the enemy's face and continue firing at them even without being revealed, which is a pretty powerful ability under certain circumstances, but quite often speaking, you're not going to need that ability that badly. In addition to that, they've also got Loic Shroud, activatable for 38 seconds. It lets you get out of a bad situation, essentially, because it makes it so that your unit's much faster, and it makes it so that your unit essentially can't be spotted. This is actually quite potent if you really need to get out of there. The one issue I have with these guys is that they're very expensive and are not necessarily that likely to get their 1,300 cost reimbursed from their missile fire, and once you've committed them to melee combat, they're pretty expensive to be in melee, making them, even though they're quite good in melee combat, it makes for a very interesting, a difficult choice to put them in there. So anyway, not my favorite sort of unit there. The regular Shadow Warriors, I think, are more than enough under most circumstances. Next up, you got the Everqueen's Court Guards. So these guys, I actually do think are really quite good. They're a little bit cheaper than the standard, so you can save a little bit, but they're actually able to encourage units around them, and they've also got access to the Banner of Avalon, which improves power recharge rate, giving them two good supportive type units, meaning that if I'm just going to have one throwaway unit of, or one unit of Everqueen's Court Guards or Sisters of Avalon as a sort of turret, basically, that sits in the back line of my army, picking away at very choice targets, these guys are actually a really decent upgrade over the standard ones if I'm going to be just having them be in that support role, because that encourage is going to mean a lot. The fact that I'm able to recharge my magic a little bit faster is going to mean a lot, and they're actually a little bit cheaper than the standard. They're only 300 points more than even just an unupgraded version, so these guys become a fairly good value proposition in my opinion. Generally speaking, since I'm only going to take one unit of Sisters of Avalon, I don't usually take two. These guys are a really, really good choice for me. All right. Next up, Dragon Princes. I find that I use these guys incorrectly, but they're a fairly powerful unit there. A little bit cheaper than the standard, as you can see here. Their big thing is that they gain flaming and anti-large. Now, the thing about the anti-large is that the amount they get is quite decent. 18 bonus versus large is pretty high. The flaming attack doesn't matter too much, but there are plenty of regenerating large monsters, like if you're up against, say, a Vargulf or something like that, or is that the one regen? I can't remember, but if you're up against that or you're up against trolls or something, all of a sudden these guys are going to be heads and tails stronger than standard Dragon Princes. So these guys I would only really take under those circumstances that I'm really needing to kill something that's a large monster, and have these guys be very effective at it. Other than that, though, they're not really necessarily going to do the job of the Dragon Princes that much better. Reasonably speaking, it's because the Dragon Princes are so powerful because of their 80 charge, their good hit points, and their physical resistance of 25%, and their martial mastery. Like, all of those combined make these units just ridiculously good at cycle charging. Anyway, next up we got the one that I'm really probably not that enthusiastic about. Let's go ahead and fully upgrade this unit here. You can see that we're saving 55 points. Heralds of the Wind here. What makes these guys theoretically good is that they got an extra 15 speed. The charge bonus really shouldn't matter that much for this type of unit. I don't really think that it does. But what's nice about them is that speed. I think they are going to run out of arrows still before they can make up that kind of cost, and the fact that they're going to run out of arrows so quickly is exacerbated when they cost 1,000 instead of just 100 or 750. I think 750 is even too much for what they actually can do, and they really just do need to have like 24 ammunition. Their missile damage isn't even really that high, so generally speaking, broadly speaking, I don't really find the Heralds of the Wind to be all that worthwhile. All right. So that is everything new to the standard High Elves, but there are some extra additions here. So if we switch over to Avalorn, we can see that their Lord choices get restricted, which is pretty typical, but they're added, they get Dryads. And this is the first sort of classical anti-cheap unit that the High Elves get access to. Like, the Spearmen are not really set up to fight other cheap infantry. Dryads are actually pretty decent, and the fact that you're able to stack a bunch of weird resistances to High Elf armies that you couldn't stack in a Wood Elf army means that these guys have the potential to be extremely good at just frontline soaking hits. In a way that they were never really intended to be able to do, and they just might potentially be very, very good at that. In addition, you've also got access to Treekin. I don't think that High Elves are really going to benefit too much from having these guys around, and they've also got access to Treeman. I think there are going to be some situations where I'm going to want to have like a Treeman as the High Elves and have that just be an interesting thing that I can do. These guys are just really, really tanky. And there's no monster that High Elves have that's really able to match these guys just in sheer tankiness and ability to sort of stand in the middle of the enemy and disrupt them and stuff like that. Although, admittedly, I don't necessarily want to have it standing in the middle while I'm firing my arrows at it anymore, because I've now got access to flaming arrows, which will absolutely kill a tree man within seconds there. Similarly, though, Nagaroth also has its own faction roster here. You got Olithanar instead of the Everqueen and no Tyrion, no Teclis. But these guys gain access to a unique type of skirmisher called the Shadow Walker. As you can see, they only get the Shadow Walker as a unique unit, which means they're a little bit behind of Avalorn in terms of unique units. But these guys are actually also quite powerful. You could compare them in a broad sense to something like, say, the Shadow Warriors. By comparison to Shadow Warriors, these guys cost a lot more, 250 more per unit. They've got a lot less hit points. They've got a little bit more leadership. They've got really, really good melee statistics in all there. And what's weird is that they've also got this lovely bonus versus infantry. It's a 12-point bonus versus infantry, which is quite extreme. These guys actually butcher things in melee combat because they're obscenely high melee attack, plus the fact that they've also got the poison effect there, meaning that they can get away with some pretty crazy stuff there. Do have stock, they do have firewall moving and all that other good stuff there. Ultimately, like, they're missing snipe though, so they can be picked off by enemy archers potentially. These guys, I don't think, are necessarily better in any way, shape, or form than the regular Shadow Warriors. Now, yes, their individual missile attacks deal 27 damage, which is higher. If we look at these guys, their individual missiles are dealing 22, but their smaller unit size means that they're still going to run out of arrows pretty quickly. The fact that they have got those poison arrows, those poison arrows, though, does mean that they will be able to keep away from enemy cavalry in a really grotesque way, and can potentially be quite powerful because of that. I think that they're an interesting alternative to Shadow Warriors, but I think ultimately Shadow Warriors are going to be a lot more cost-effective. The one exception is if you want to really hammer an infantry-focused army. Like, these guys against Skaven can do some pretty grotesque things. The only thing is if they get counter-caught by some Night Runners or something like that, or some Gutter Runners, then those guys would basically be able to take these guys apart pretty quickly, because the Night Runners and Gutter Runners have that resistance to physical damage that's probably going to keep them alive, and you're probably going to spot each other at fairly close ranges. Meaning the extra range on these guys is not going to matter all that much. Although you could just charge, I suppose, with these guys. Probably not the most effective idea. You probably get killed before it happened, but they do have a very, very respectable weapon strength there. Anyway, that's all of the units that are added to the roster. Got a couple battles here. I'm just going to go ahead and hit the playthrough here. And let's start with this one here. It shows off... So I think that right now the High Elves are in a position where they're actually very, very good at that sort of skirmishing battle, but at the same time their frontline units are still some of the best in the game. So it really does take a lot to figure out what you're going to be fighting against when you're up against the High Elves, and they're now able to sort of do everything. the thing that you can take sort of advantage of is the fact that they can't do everything at the same time. They can do anything, but they can't do everything, in a sort of sense there. And because of that, you're often going to find yourself in a position where the High Elves are just lacking in something if they chose incorrectly. So right away, we're using our units here to start skirmishing, and we're just firing away at these clan rats with shields. Chaff unit, we're wasting arrows. Sure, you could say that we're wasting our arrows, but this is sort of what we actually took these guys for, is to sort of really quickly burn down these sorts of lighter units that are kind of frontline to the Skaven, and to be able to sort of force him forward in a way that he doesn't necessarily want to be coming forward. We're missing a lot of these shots in a dumb way there, which is a bit unfortunate, but that's fine. We're using the Luthanar to start picking away at these Warp Lightning Cannons, and he's actually dealt some pretty good damage to them already. But yeah, we're mostly just getting around there with our Shadow Warriors and dealing damage wherever we can. He's coming forward with these Skaven Slaves with spears, and we're going to be able to deal some pretty good damage against these units as well. But more importantly, he's decided to start coming out with the Warlord and the Assassin. The Assassin's going to be misused by my opponent here in a big way, but broadly speaking, we're not too worried about this. We're going to start retreating with our units here. We're still staying pretty far forward, honestly, but we are going to start moving back pretty quickly here. Skaven Slaves with spears do retreat very quickly. Now, my opponent could have been bum rushing me with all of his units here, and I think that would have been a much better idea, but we still would have done the same thing. We still would have been kiting against him, running away, and trying to sort of deal damage whichever way we can. I do fail to dodge this like a bit of a scrub. I would have had to have run forward to really dodge it effectively, but at this point in time, you can see the Warlord sort of charging forward, getting hit by the Shadow Warriors and stuff like that, but I've got a nasty surprise for him coming in. He's used all of his abilities. I've got the Dragon Princes here, the Fireborn, with their bonus versus large coming in, and he's just been net of Ammontocked, so he's not having a great day here. He's going to get hit. His monstrous infantry status means that I'm dealing a lot of damage to him here. And then we got this other stuff sort of standing right in front of him as well. Over here, I've just said screw it, charge my Shadow Warriors straight into those Skaven Slaves, and they have basically immediately crumbled. Dealing some friendly fire to myself with the Shadow Warriors here, but you know what, that's fine. Archers back here, just regular archers, and we've also got the Everqueen's Court Guard. Now my opponent has decided finally to start running forward. He was hoping, I think, to sort of lure me into a better spot for the Warp Lightning Cannons to fire. Warp Lightning Cannons firing, getting some shots in at a Lithanar, but not really hitting, and I'm able to sort of chase off his Warlord at this point in time. My opponent does have access to his own skirmishers, and quite a few of them in fact. Gutter Runners with poison and the Death Runners back here. Death Runners are really annoying, actually, but the Gutter Runners with poison are also fairly annoying. I don't have enough cavalry to easily deal with them, but I do have enough missile fire to actually deal with them to a certain extent there. And of course, we always just wait till he runs out of ammunition, I guess. But at this point in time, we're getting a decent net of Ammontock on both of these Rat Ogre units, and we're going to continue pummeling them with our Everqueen's Court Guard. Got our Shadow Warriors still plugging away with their arrows here. Like I said, their assassins really poorly managed here. I do get a good charge against their Death Runners with my Fireborn. The nice thing here is that their physical resistance doesn't work here because I've got actually flaming attacks. So these guys get shredded down a lot faster than they normally would. Like, honestly speaking, Death Runners versus Dragon Princes is already not the greatest thing for them to get hit by, but yeah, that's sort of the way it is. These Shadow Warriors still retreating for some reason. I forget about the Light Wizard, but you know what? I've already gotten some really good net of Ammontocks off, so yeah, I'm literally just in combat with these guys. I end up getting them out eventually, but yeah, it takes a while. I should have actually just charged these Skaven Slave Spears with the Shadow Warriors, but instead what I do is I bring up the Sword Masters because I figure why not activate those now. I'm just running amok a bit with my Chariot here. Now, he's holding me in place here, but realistically speaking, I'm actually losing this fight here just because of how much stuff I'm fighting all at once here. I've got, like, spears, I've got the Rat Ogres, I've got all sorts of stuff that these guys had to fight, so they did actually pretty well all in all, considering the Death Runners probably cost about as much as half the unit anyway, so another bolt coming down, Warp Lightning, I'm thinking, but not that important. Clan Rats, Clanner Shields, Spearmen, not that important. We're not going to think too much about those guys, but got some Spearmen back here. They're just going to sort of hang around. So we have got Rat Ogres, we have got Clan Rats with Spears now fighting against my Shadow Warriors. The Shadow Warriors are going to be interesting in this particular fight. Over here we got Plague Monk Censer Bearers, and I've actually shifted fire, so I'm focusing the Everqueen's Court Guards against these guys. They've gotten some kills already, 27 kills. I'm not sure I remember what they're firing at, but I think it was mostly Rat Ogres. Yeah, it was Rat Ogres. Here we managed to just rally with this guy and just get another of the... immediately get a net of Amatok on the Plague Monk Censer Bearers here, at which point they're just standing in front of the Everqueen's Court Guards. Now, these guys aren't armored, so the anti-armor, not relevant, but what these guys are also using is magic attacks. And since Plague Monk Censer Bearers have a bonus versus physical damage, a fairly substantial one in fact, this is going to be shredding through them much faster than they would really like. So this is actually a really good counter against the Plague Monk Censer Bearers and other units similar to that with the bonus versus physical. At this stage, my opponent is really just sort of all over the map here. I've got these Shadow Warriors still charging, cutting their way through these Clan Rats with Spears, doing a pretty good job of that. The Spearmen are sort of running around in a derpy way. They're not going to be able to actually end up catching anything that important. But that's not really that important. Olithanar over here, only 12 kills. He's not going to be able to do much, honestly. Over here, Sisters of Everqueen's Court Guard, Sisters of Avalorn, are now fighting a Warlock Engineer in melee combat, and they're going to be able to win that fight. They're virtually out of ammunition anyway, so them fighting Warlock Engineer, really good use of their time, actually. Got a couple dead ones, but I think they've almost all died from the Warp Lightning rather than melee combat, because they're actually like really quite good in melee, and the Warlock Engineer is pretty mediocre in melee. So I think that they're actually basically crushing in there. Over here, Clan Rats, we're just sort of kiting against them with our regular archers. And you can see, like, our regular archers have not spent very much ammunition. And it's because it's hard to find angles where I can fire at the enemy effectively or easily. In any event, though, Dragon Princes trying to charge back in, they get sort of poisoned down, and I think retreat before they're able to. Bit of a shame. Swordmasters over here doing nothing. Spearmen basically killing some Clan Rats. Not really a good use of their time, honestly, but that's perfectly fine. And in any event, though, not a whole lot left. Shadow Warriors ended up chasing off the Warp Lightning Cannons. They were able to easily beat them in melee combat. So sort of went all the way back and forth there. Dragon Princes back one more time. This is going to be one last glorious charge here. So yeah, here we go. One last glorious charge for these guys, able to get some impact damage, but more importantly, these guys are now locked in melee combat, and we're just firing into the backs of them with the Handmaidens. And since again we're looking at units with physical resistance, the fact that I'm firing magical attacks means that these guys are taking some pretty hefty damage. Pretty good stuff there, all in all. So yeah, we've mismanaged our Dragon Princes pretty badly, but got 123 kills with one Shadow Warrior unit, 87 with the other, 146 with our Sword Masters, which again, still really good. Olithanar barely getting any kills there because, yeah, he's not actually that good, in my opinion, other than for supporting Shadow Warriors. And really good, actually, kills from the Everqueen's Court Guards, and including Rat Ogres and other monstrous type units. Like, they're actually really good. I quite like them. But anyway, let's take a quick continue here, and let's take a look at my most recent game. I only save a few games at a time because my hard drive is the worst. So this is another type of army here. I've got a Lariel, but you'll notice that I'm still using a lot of the same sort of elements here, because I want to sort of give these a shot there and sort of highlight the differences between the way the Lords play. Now, my opponent makes the cardinal sin mistake of taking air units against High Elves, and I always say that High Elves are not someone you ever want to take air units against. He is going to try and waste a lot of my ammunition with Malekith, and I do end up wasting more than I would honestly like to. I should have had everybody off of fire at will, but honestly speaking, I deal a few hundred points of damage to Malekith with these guys, which is fine, actually. Handmaiden in particular, though, firing all her shots specifically at Malekith, he's diving back and forth to try and dodge my arrows and just make me waste my shots. But since we're deliberately aim firing at other things here, and the Handmaidens dealing her damage against Malekith. He's taking a few hundred points of damage from those shots there, and I'm just sort of chipping away at this unit of Dread Spears quite badly. Here you can see like we've wasted some shots there. Deals like 50 points of damage to him, and then we start firing again with Dread Spears. He's going to waste basically all of his magic on my 2 units of Shadow Warriors, which is a humongous waste for Malekith. He should not be firing all of these shots at he should not be firing all this magic off like he is. And we're getting like those good shots, like the armor-piercing ones. We actually get a good series of shots off there again at Malekith. Like, we're getting the stuff that matters here against him. Blade Storm and I forget what that spell is. More Chill Wind. Like he's firing a lot. Like I'm trying to dodge these spells a little bit here, or spread my units out a little bit, or make it so that they're not taking as much damage from these. And honestly speaking, like he's taking some pretty hefty damage. He's taking almost 1,000 points of damage already. He does manage to get out of the way of most of the shots from the Sisters of Avalorn though, which is really good for him. But at this point in time, like I've said, screw it. I just bring up Alariel, and she's going to say, up yours, Malekith. Like, he's dodged these ones, and this is because I'm trying to do other things at this time, and you can see him weaving in and around like some sort of asshole. But I'm going to start focus firing at his ground troops again here. You can see that he takes a big hit from the Sisters of Avalorn there. But more importantly, he's now caught in the Tempest, and even though it's nerfed, Malekith is slow enough that he's taking huge amounts of damage, and he ended up trying to do a turn while he was in there. So not only did he get caught in that, he's now getting shot in the ass by Sisters of Avalorn. It takes like 3,000 damage from the Tempest plus Sisters. So he's practically dead at this point in time, and is forced to sort of retreat from the fight pretty badly. He's at this point stopped trying to juke as much because he kind of just has to get out of there, but at this point in time, he's run his infantry away. I really should have taken these guys off of fire at will, but you know what, whatever. It really doesn't matter at this point. Malekith's basically dead. Which is, he can't afford to have that happen. He can't afford to have spent all of that magic to have 2 half-alive units of Shadow Warriors still in the field here with the ability to continue firing at him. I am still sicking the Handmaiden on him. Every time she lands a hit, it's like 200 points of damage through his armor, so that works out really well there. Shadow Warriors going back to hitting these Dread Spears. And, like, they're not dealing a lot of kills here. Like, their kill counts are going to be quite low, but the amount of damage that they've dealt, they've taken 1 unit down to half health, even though they didn't kill that many of them, and they've taken another unit down to almost half health. Eventually I'm going to switch all my shots to attacking the unit of the Sisters of Slaughter there, but yeah, like, we're already doing pretty well here in terms of the amount of damage we caused. Malekith is basically forced to run all the way over there. Like, Sorceress with Lore of Fire is now completely useless. There's no point in her existing because she doesn't have enough magic to really contribute anymore. And it's the wrong kind of lore in any event to replenish. You'd want to use Lore Beast if you really wanted to have the ability to get more magic back somehow by casting. In any event, though, you can see, like, still most of a full unit, but they're at half health. So at this point in time, though, we're switching all of our shots for these guys over to the Sisters of Slaughter. I fire off a wasted shot with the Everqueen's Court Guards against these guys before switching them over to the right flank, because they should not be wasting their shots against these lightly armored units here. But in any event, you can see, like, we've dealt a decent amount of damage to these Sisters of Slaughter. Now, Alariel, I think I've taken the Boon of Isha. I can't remember for sure. But this means that we've got magic attacks, which is going to help against these Sisters of Slaughter, who also have their physical resistance. Like, we've already dealt half the damage to them as well, and now we're just charging in with the Shadow Warriors here. And they're tired already, but they'll still be able to slam into the front of these Dread Spears. This unit here also does that. I accidentally fire a shot into these Dread Spears over here, but it's okay. We end up following in with a charge from our Shadow Warriors over here, and they're going to start tearing through these Dread Spears as well. So, Blades of the Blood Queen, I really needed to pay attention to my Handmaiden over here. I was not paying attention to my Handmaiden. I was hoping she'd kill Malekith. But in any event, we get some really nice shots against these guys. Look how much damage they've taken already, just from like 2 volleys. Practically a third of the way done there, basically. Another one, yeah, like, this is such good damage. Handmaiden is like just standing there like a moron, unfortunately. we got some more units slamming into the front of the Dread Spears, and at this point in time, like, he's soul stealing to try and keep Malekith alive, but I managed to hit him with a Tempest, so even though that soul steal will keep him at base, like, he's gaining back health, he's losing sort of the health at the same rate. So here comes some more arrows down in there, and you can see that this volley is going to basically kill him. And there he goes. Sisters of Slaughter still doing their thing. I'm going to keep my units pretty healthy there. Waste another volley of arrows against the Dread Spears there, but we're flooding forward into the Dread Spears with a bunch of other units there. And now firing at the Blades of the Blood Queen here. They're going to be sort of trying to retreat back to this stuff. I'm not sure why, but they're getting absolutely wrecked here. I'm going to switch over to the regular Hargoneth Executioners pretty soon. We're charging into Executioners with Shadow Warriors, which is pretty crazy, and also not a good idea. Even though we're winning quite profoundly here, it's not a good idea to have done that. Still, they've more than earned their keep in this particular battle. Over here, we're just holding these guys down with the Spearmen. They're losing really, really badly, really quickly, but the Hargoneth Executioner is just losing too badly against my missiles, and at this point my opponent capitulates. So, yeah, like, my opponent took the wrong army against me and was sort of picking the wrong strategy. Like, Malekith is not a good pick. He can solo entire armies under the correct circumstances, but he can't do it if he's in the air and he's against High Elves. It just does not work in that sort of situation there. The Fire Mage was a weird choice, but the other army units could potentially have worked against the High Elves prior to them getting access to the Sisters of Avalorn, because that armor-penetrating ranged attack was just too much, I think, for him. Like, this is not too dissimilar from a composition that used to be fairly effective against me in some ways. Broadly speaking, I would have liked to have seen him drop the Canine Assassin and the Sorceress with Fire, and replace those with more units, like a unit of Witch Elves and a Death Hag. That would have made this exactly the sort of thing that I'm actually quite worried about when I encounter it. But what he took just is countered by the new High Elf units really, really badly. Shadow Warriors, again, even though they didn't get those kills, humongous amounts of damage coming down from them. Sisters of Avalorn, huge damage against a very, very expensive unit. Blades of the Blood Queen. Like, let's take a quick look. How much is a unit of Blades of the Blood Queen here? I think that unit actually costs more than the unit that I was using there myself. So, let's see here. Yeah, Blades of the Blood Queen Executioners, it's 1,500. These guys actually do cost more than the unit that was firing at them that basically killed them. They've got that sort of Guardian ability for their units, whatever, that's fine. But yeah, like them, the Sisters of Singing Doom, that's not what he took, is it? No, he took a 9 Chevron unit of Sisters of Slaughter. That's really weird. I thought that was a unit of, for some reason I was thinking that was a unit of, what's it called, of Regiments of Renown. Let's actually see how much a 9 Chevron unit of Sisters of 1,500 for these guys. They basically got killed by 2 units of Shadow Warriors. Yeah, that not really the greatest of choices. I would not have upgraded these guys. Recharges if they're losing in combat, plus 4 piercing damage, plus 9 melee attack. That's interesting. Physical resistance 20%. Again, completely useless against Alariel the Everqueen because of that sort of aura of deals magic damage. So yeah, like, my opponent just sort of got completely wrecked there by the sort of composition differences that the High Elves have now, what they're able to bring to the battlefield now that the patch has hit. Wow, that is a lot of useless stuff. Okay, anyway, yeah, so anyway, I hope you found this episode enjoyable. I know I enjoyed playing the new High Elves. They're a lot more fun to play now, even though I don't necessarily think they're actually too much more powerful. I think they are a little bit more powerful, but I think some of the most effective units in this new patch are just simply more efficient than what they used to be. I don't know if they're necessarily like super, super strong killers or anything like that, but we'll have to see how things pan out. Anyway, I hope you found this episode enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.